Welcome to today's webinar, compiled and produced by the team at biznews.com.
All right, good morning and welcome everybody for today's webinar brought to you by Deloitte and based on the global trends reports of Deloitte as well as ESCOM, who will be sharing with us their experience of location liberation, working remotely or adaptive workplaces in government. So we will be sharing their insights as well as taking questions from you. Let me extend a word of welcome to the attendees of this webinar. We welcome comments and questions from you. So I will be moderating this panel until around 11 o'clock or thereabouts. But before we start, let me tell you who's going to present for you today. Khabat Tabane, Director, Government and Public Services Industry Leader. Tumelo Siaketso, who is Director, Human Capital, Deloitte Africa. And we'll also be having Aus LC Pule, who is Group Executive Human Resources, ESCOM Holdings. We'll tell you more about them in a moment, but the first person to present is Khabat Tabane, who has over 20 years public sector working experience and been in consulting for over 13 years, currently the Government and Public Services Industry Leader at Deloitte Africa, focusing on innovative solutions for the public sector, especially the provincial sphere of government for maximum service delivery, clean governance, and accountability, and has been involved in the public sector, the development of the Youth Economic Participatory Strategy for the Northwest Province, and was member of the Provincial Tender Board, leading the Infrastructure Portfolio Committee of the board, head of the Northwest Provincial Trade and Investment Promotion Agency in 2003 to 2009, and has also done a whole range of other things. But today, his focus is going to be on why the global trends and the discussion that we have in this morning. Ratabani, good morning. Welcome.
The ever elusive unmute button. Good morning, Tim Modise, and good morning to the panelists. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second webinar on dealing with the government trends of 2021, as has been alluded to. We have a relationship with our global firm whereby the trends going on in governments every year for the last 5 years have been discussed, and today we are discussing the second of the trends that have been identified. We have identified 9 trends as a firm that in 2021 the governments are moving towards, and we have chosen as South Africa that we believe that 5 of those trends are very relevant to our environment. And as a result, we have chosen to have a discussion with our clients on how these trends relate to them. Therefore, this webinar today will deal with the second of those. Yesterday, well, not yesterday, but a few days ago, we dealt with the trend that deals with digitalization in government and where we think it is going, as well as cybersecurity. Today, we're dealing with location liberation, which speaks to a great extent to how we deal with adaptive workplaces in government, specifically looking at the value proposition of Deloitte that deals with the future of work. And Austumi will, with us shortly, discuss that. Welcome once again, and I hope that we are going to have a very informative conversation on where we think COVID-19 has pushed us to make sure that we think differently about where we work and how we work and where we will work in the future. But team, without taking much time, thank you very much, and I hope that we will enjoy today's conversation as we did the last one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khabatabane, Director, Government and Public Services Industry Leader at Deloitte Africa. Now, Austumelo Siaketso is the Director, Human Capital, Deloitte Africa. She works within the public sector and TMT industry with focus in organization transformation and talent, reward and advancement analytics and HR services. She has over 20 years experience having worked in both the internal human capital capacity and in-client advisory roles, and with her expertise and experience has covered a wide range of human capital services, advising boards and remuneration committees. So, right person to talk us through the trend of the trends of the location liberation. Austumelo, take it.
Thank you, Pratim. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to share the trends around really what we call location liberation. And it is what, for a better understanding, it's about the adaptive workplace, where we have seen with COVID how we had to pivot all our employees that they all get to work from home where possible. And with that, the trends that we have received have shown so much that there's so much benefits that government globally or government organizations globally have benefited out of this. So in this session, we would like to really highlight just some of the trends, especially the benefits that our government colleagues, moreover our public sector colleagues who would be listening or who are listening would be able to benefit from this or understand what others have done and have seen as the benefits globally. So maybe if you want me to start off a team, I can just start off with just 4 basic benefits that we have seen coming out of the government trends 2021 related specifically to the adaptive workplaces in the government. And benefit number 1 being that where really we have seen that there has been some reduction of operating costs. And the reduction of operating costs have been brought by specifically the fact that the operating expenses that we have been taken care of when people are in offices, they are no longer really a big part of our expenditure as governments. So government were able to shift some of their costs to benefit the society from a perspective of addressing COVID-related matters, whilst having saved from this reduction of these costs. So that's one of the things that we have seen coming out of these benefits. The second benefit really that we have seen is a wider access to your talent pool. And we are seeing more and more where employees, not only from the trends itself, these government trends themselves, where employees are looking for organizations whereby now they can accommodate my request to work in a hybrid model, working from home and working in the office certain days. And so that has become now an opportunity where employers now can look for talent from a wider pool, because people don't have to be seated literally physically in your location. And now the government opportunities also to be able to attract those talent that they could not attract because of a physical location. We see this example especially with your IT jobs, where I can be doing the job anywhere in the world. So it gives an opportunity also for our public sector, for our government organizations to be able to access talent in that manner. And this has also been a key part of this trend coming out from other governments too. The third one, which we have seen, and which specifically where we have seen in Canada, the Canadian Treasury, where they have seen improved productivity because people are spending less time now on the roads. So where there's outcomes and outputs are clearly defined, people are now able to focus, and there's just increase in productivity. And like I said, the Canadian Treasury here had given an example that there was about 11% improvement in productivity, which is great when we look at such benefit. And maybe the last one that I can share, benefit coming out of these government trends 2021, is around employee engagement and empowerment. So employees feel more empowered in that I can be, as long as the outcomes are clear, I can be able to do my work while still doing my other things that I need to do from a personal perspective. As a result, also there's a sense of engagement, higher engagement, and in one of the territories where we have seen about 11% of their engagement levels going up because of employees now feel more empowered being in their space, being trusted to deliver whilst not having to be in the physical location itself. And maybe I will leave it here for my colleagues to come in, but those are just the benefits that we're really seeing coming out of this Government Trends 2021 that has been shared to date.
Ostumi, thank you very much for that presentation. So let's look at the real life experience at Eskom, and Elsie Pule will be talking to us. She's Group Executive Human Resources, Eskom Holdings. Obtained her degree social work 89 at the University of the North, later obtaining a master's science business engineering from Warwick University in the UK 2004. Started as a social worker in 88 before joining Eskom in 95, and thereafter moved to be the Chief Officer Human Resources at the South African Revenue Services, SARS, returning to Eskom as Senior General Manager in 2012. And she's been Group Executive Human Resources in 2016. And she's going to talk to us about the adaptive workplaces in government and talk us through the Eskom experience. How's Elsie?
Thank you so much, Tim, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm not going to go through the slides, but our slides as a case study are available for distribution. I think when last year happened in March, most organizations were not ready. And I think for a lot of us as practitioners, we've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and it seemed like it was going to be very far. But what happened was that we needed to dance immediately on a shifting carpet and find ways to continue delivering on our various mandates as various government organizations. I want to just briefly share with you some of the experiences, high level, in terms of what happened. Like, for example, when we were at the peak of the lockdown, we were able to enable very rapidly about 70% of our workforce to adopt a hybrid and remote work practice. You'd also be aware that we are an essential service. So at the time, we had about 12,000 staff members on the field to continue generating power and keep the lights on. But the majority of us were held back, including some of the field workers who we allowed them to work from home, and we had to adopt technological opportunities to dispatch them from home to go connect our customers out there. What we also found at the time was that 43 of our key productivity and performance indicators showed a general improvement or remain steady. We also found that the productivity levels we had prior to lockdown, after the 3 months of operating within lockdown, had not really shifted. So one would argue that when you work remotely, productivity dropped. We have not seen that. So if you look at our productivity measures that we use in terms of the megawatts sent out, in terms of the kilometers of line, in terms of revenue, even though it was the one that was impacted slightly with the less demand in terms of electricity. What I also want to bring to our attention, colleagues, is that we conducted a management survey because I believe very strongly that when you're talking about remote work or hybrid work, the biggest threat is to managers. Managers who especially are struggling in terms of how do you really manage people that you don't see. So we decided to prioritize them. We did a survey. What we found is that we had a 72 response rate, which indicated that the productivity or the utilization of employees was at about 79.5%, similar to what we had prior to lockdown. So that also eradicates the doubt that when you don't see people, they're probably not working. So if you had non-performance before lockdown, they probably will still be evident in your business post to lockdown. So the responsibility then rests on the manager to make sure that you manage the productivity of your employees. We did a survey on our employees, and we continue to do a few of those. What we found was that 91% of the respondents indicated that they preferred remote work, and then about 57% of that, they said they wanted to have a hybrid model. what we were finding was that people wanted to work remotely, but still have an opportunity to come and plug into what we call here at home, into the mothership once in a while. A lot of the feedback we are getting from employees, some employees were very concerned that we have not been like sort of contacting them, feeling sort of redundant. So psychologically, it gives you like a sense that you're still employed if you go plug into the mothership. So we did a business case, and we realized that if we can move about 32% of our staff to fully work on a hybrid model, we would have like sort of meaningful outcomes. And we started doing some work parallel to that. We started like sort of reviewing our real estate because we're also struggling financially. So this was a great opportunity for us to rationalize and optimize the use of office space as well as transportation, where we offer transportation. And maybe where I should end without like sort of going into the details at this point, our business case of considering a hybrid work model post-COVID has been approved. Our goal is to achieve a high performance culture and also enhance flexibility. And we are talking about you can work from anywhere, anytime, and it doesn't matter what you're wearing, because if you're looking at the profile of our workforce, where you've got all the managers who are worried that you might not even shower when you have to start working, we're saying it doesn't matter. We need to start focusing on how we manage outcomes rather than inputs or seeing someone sitting at their desk. So I'll stop at that point, Tim. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Mayor. And let me take a step back and go to Tumelo. A question to you. You spoke about the benefits earlier on, but from your reports, what are the typical challenges from around the world that were highlighted in the report?
So the typical challenges, again, very much also global trends, be government and also private sector. It's about the balance. I think there was a lot of people battling with or struggling rather with the balance of the work itself and the family commitments themselves now. Because they became blurred. That's number one. Where there was that balance, and with that then became the challenge of mental well-being. So most organizations, including even from a government trends perspective, have had to look at the employee mental well-being to make sure that with all that the blurriness between work now and home commitments, we help with the load of taking the mental strain that people have experienced. So the greatest one, Team, one would say, has been the mental well-being of the employees that has been experienced across, including within the government entities themselves, based on the trends.
All right, Elsie, how quickly at Eskom were you able to adapt to the work from home approach? I mean, as you said in your presentation, that not many organizations were prepared for the lockdowns and the restrictions that forced people to adapt and work from home or work remotely. But in your case, how quickly were you able to adapt?
We didn't have an option because we do have a mandate of keeping the lights on. So we couldn't spend a lot of time trying to plan. So we had to find a way of dancing on a shifting carpet from day one. This was a risk that was primarily managed, facilitated by HR, but all our emergency protocols kicked in. So from day one, we managed to get 70% of the people to work remotely, but then we had a commitment that 30% of our workforce, particularly your operators, your maintainers, and some of the field workers out there, had to be on the site. So we then focused on ensuring that we create a safe working environment. And I think at the time we also took it very far because we were very conscious of not being the employer who'd expose people to COVID. But the interesting bit, Tim, about that was that when we were tracking the numbers from the second week, we were finding that people who were getting sick were actually the people that we have kept home rather than the people on the side. So I believe based on our robust risk management and also creating a safe environment, we were able to mobilize relatively quickly.
And I want to go back to Melo's question on or comment on wellness. I mean, you know, how do you what do we mean when you talk about wellness as an issue that was seen as a challenge, and how did organizations that were researched deal with that, or how are they managing that?
So wellness in this instance is the ability of employees really to be able to cope with all that is put before them, mentally taking into account that you are now here having to do your job. You've got your children, especially in the first phases of the lockdowns, which everybody really had to be home. So you've got your children, you have to do online schooling. For some parents, it's the first time, they don't understand. You have got others looking at you now, and especially the research shows from a female perspective, others looking at you to provide, usually how you provide from meals and all of that, whereas back then everybody would be, it's either at school or then you had to do that. So carrying all that from a mental capacity, and still being able to deliver on your work without being anxious to say, am I dropping the balls at work? This is where the mental well-being comes in. And as a result, we have seen a lot of fatigue, we have seen a lot of burnout, and this is where the mental well-being comes in from that perspective, where employees then had to be assisted to say, how do you work around all the responsibilities that you now have. But where we have seen employers coming in is from an extent of offering. Some of them would always have the well-being facilities already, but most employers extending them even beyond to say, you know, you have got access to your, what we call, some of them they call, like for an example, a company like ICUS that can help you with any psychological, any issues around mental, any emotional, but also where we have seen, which was very great, where companies came on board, was to help employees deal with grief, because there was also some element of grief or people being sick in that process. So those are the things when it comes, that when we speak rather of mental well-being, were the things that brought this mental perspective, mental situation, but also then they resulted in things like burnout, they resulted in anxiety, they resulted in, you know, and depression. And this is where companies had to come in to offer those services of saying, you can reach out to any of these service providers or reach out to us as human capital. I'll help you to direct you to the right places.
Well, let me invite the attendees of this webinar to also engage with us. If you want to make a comment or ask a question, please feel free to do that, and I will pass the question on to the panelists. And to go to you once again, Elsie, there is a view that people working remotely get to be disconnected, and I would like to believe that in the context of Eskom, you work as teams, right? That people work on different projects and have to work together. So how did you adapt to that, where people have to engage as individuals and keep up the morale, you know, the team spirit, as it were, for them to deliver their projects on time?
Thank you. What became a shock to the system was to use technology to run meetings. And we ended up using Teams, and we didn't have time to be trained on Teams. So there were a lot of dynamics in terms of how do you really run the meetings based on that. But we found that a lot of our employees were getting really frustrated, especially when they felt that they were not connected to the organization or connected to business. So from the HR perspective, we started running roundtables, and one of the roundtables I initiated around the 4th month was to basically engage the female employees, particularly your young mothers, because what they were faced with was not only the work they had to do, they were all of a sudden faced with homeschooling that they had to deal with. And Dumi was also indicating that your gender, in fact, the issues of gender, or probably the lockdown pronounced patriarchy even more, where irrespective of your role or what level you felt you were as a female, when you are now stuck in a confined space, you ended up having to do the work of your employer and still slave behind the stove and laundry and do the other stuff. So we had what we call pulse checks that will send to employees. We created some apps where people also like check in and give us their status in terms of how they were feeling and so on. We also encouraged managers that when they also check in with their employees, they should also encourage them to switch on their cameras. Our bandwidth was not the strongest. As a result, when your cameras were on, teams could not work properly. So we continued having meetings, like sort of not seeing each other, but we were encouraging our employees to do that. But what's important with also the question you asked to me is that when we looked at our EAP report, we saw an increase in terms of the problems which were raised on our EAP program. And we also started seeing an increase in terms of substance abuse. So we then created a pack that we call an employee care kit, which we also encourage our employees to share with their families. That also helped them in terms of mental well-being and provided a lot of numbers in terms of who to contact if you need to talk or if you're struggling with issues. But the issues of isolation were coming out largely in those reports.
Whilst you're still there, let me ask about how this has affected your relationships with your stakeholders, particularly your customers.
So we had implemented a few levers, particularly in our distribution business, because we were trying to make sure that we focus on the key aspects of our delivery. We reviewed our KPIs slightly in terms of our response time, because a lot of our employees who are dispatched from distribution, we had largely kept at home. And the ones who were like sort of basically working initially were the ones tackling the calls from the call centers. So it was going to take us largely longer to get to our customers compared to how how it was before the lockdown. So from a customer perspective, if you look at our revenue, if you look at our customer perspective, there had been a decline. So if you look at all the measures that improved, the measure that did not improve on our side was the customer measures and the measures around a revenue collection as well.
Well, I read somewhere, and I want a comment from both of you on this one, that, you know, performance or productivity may have improved following the research that's been conducted generally around the world, as well as based on the experiences that you've shared with me. But that there's one aspect that seemingly is being compromised and organizations must be aware of, and that is creativity that you expect from the employees. Is that something, to me, that you'd like to comment on, that you would have any views about it, that not much input creative-wise is received from employees?
Yes, definitely, and that is a valid point, Tim. So what we are saying, especially in terms of the hybrid working model, to address exactly that point, this is where now the office space is now becoming more of a collaborative, where the creative thinking goes to happen. So where we are seeing more and more is that in offices now are being opened that 1 day or 2 days for people to come and share ideas, come and collaborate, come and innovate. Whereas in the past, office was like, I'm going there every day to work. Office now, or the office space now, is seen now more as a collaborative, creative innovation space. Whereas then I go back and work at home, focus, and make sure that I focus on my other outcomes. That is how now it's being taken to address the creativity and innovative part.
Elsie, comment?
May add to that, what I found with us, and we haven't like sort of tested that in terms of pure science. What I found was that people were becoming more creative in terms of trying to retain some of the normal they knew, given what we are facing at this point. We ran, for example, a women's conference, and I remember somewhere in the middle, it felt like we were like sort of in the room, because we found that employees were finding new ways of making it impactful. They were finding new ways without being dictated to. So I have a sneaky suspicion, and we still have to test that given where we are at now, our employees are now forced to start thinking differently and thinking out of the box, because previously I could just look over the wall or go next door and ask for advice. Now, because we are mainly on our own, we are then forced to do things differently. I have seen some of our field workers also trying to use technology. One would be in the Eastern Cape, one would be in Mpumalanga, trying to also use their phones in a way that I never thought people would use their phone to bring someone into the situation, as the other one guides someone in terms of how to fix a fault. So I have a sense, and we still have to prove that I'll rely on Deloitte to assist us, that to some extent, innovation and creative ways of dealing with these issues have increased. On our side, we used to have like sessions where we'd be engaging employees. If we had seen 500 employees at a go, we'd be very proud of ourselves. And when we started implementing some or using team events, you find that instead of the CEO talking to 500 people at a time, they can actually talk about to 30,000 people. So we found that there was a lot of creativity. We deployed a number of vaccination sites, and we also trying to encourage our employees to vaccinate. We use the leadership of Eskom virtually in a way that we have never used them before, to continue being visible at all of those vaccination sites and interacting through the screen, but feeling like you are really there. So it looks like, to some level, innovation might have shifted.
Well, Maseko Sema, who's attending this webinar, says, I find it fascinating that employers reported an increase in substance abuse, but wants to know whether this has affected the policies when it comes to the employability of such employees, or maybe the relationship that such employees have with yourself as the employer.
If I take that, what we had, we had made an assumption as human resources that your social, emotive issues were going to increase with the lockdown. So what we then did upfront, we led with our EAP program. So we also saw like a heightened utilization of our EAP program. But what we also did, we were in our employees' faces to make sure that we provide the support. They know the numbers. As an executive, we meet to this day. We meet every Tuesday afternoon, and constantly we had been working at a level where we support and encourage employees and so on. So what we had picked with the use of substances, we had seen in our EAP report. Remember, our EAP program is a confidential service that is rendered to our employees. What we get a report that gives us trends in terms of that. We had seen that employees were volunteering and calling the EAP program without us nudging and asking for help, and also asking for help for their family members, because we also provide for members of family members of our employees as well. For me, the fact that people could access the service without prompted indicated that they were doing something about the issues they were experiencing. We also saw a team, a heightened number in terms of gender-based, and we saw it also through the report. And as we were engaging with our women, we were finding there were a lot of this, and then we introduced like sort of more interventions through our Eskom Women Advancement Program to make sure that women know where to go, and they also know how to like sort of address some of the issues that they were going through. And all of those, I think they help because we've got a robust program that we just put at the front in the absence of doing anything else.
Another comment is from Rulani Makubela. It's actually a question, who says, how is employee morale impacted upon, given that most of the people who are able to work in the hybrid mode are those who are office bound, whilst those who deliver services on the front line need to be out there on a daily basis?
If I may take that to Tim, we have about 42,000 employees, as I indicated, and when we started, the 30,000 that we identified as frontline workers, we also empowered the managers where they were also rotating them. So when we started day one, we also had our call center personnel coming in, and then quickly we sorted out the technology issue so they could connect from anywhere. And in terms of the vast majority of people who benefited from like sort of working remotely, it would have been the support staff. But we, as I indicated, we've been doing a number of surveys asking our employees in terms of how they feel. So we have not seen a decline in morale. In fact, as I indicated, was that more than 90% were happy with the arrangements. And we also created additional human resources practices to support the employees who were going out to work. We also created an interim recognition program to also recognize those such that people don't feel like the ones who are working at home are getting preference. To the contrary, when you look at the challenges, the employees who are working from home, they were complaining about the abuse from the employer, because now when someone sets up a meeting and is on Teams and someone already assumes for you that you don't have travel time, you end up with back-to-back meetings, people not respecting boundaries, and people just like sort of allocating time to various connections. And I think in their quest to connect, people tend to overextend the setting up of meetings and so on. So we do a survey annually. We had just completed our survey, and we haven't shown any sign in the decline in terms of morale.
Well, I find it interesting that you talk about the impact on people's time. I've heard from other people telling me that the seniors at work tend to set up meetings at random times. When people were used to working, let's say 7 to 5 or 9 to 5, now meetings are held in the evenings when people want to watch the news or watch their favorite shows and so on, and that affects their personal time as well.
I have some of my colleagues also who can't sleep and they start working at 2 in the morning. But what we did as an executive, we then also introduced a no meetings Thursday, because we were concerned when we were looking at the volumes and we were looking at the time that's spent on the meetings, we wanted to also empower our people to be the ones who are managing the boundaries. But then we then said mechanistically, on Thursday, there shouldn't be any meeting, so that people can also have time to recalibrate and also have time to like maybe do some work for a change. So that has been an issue. It still remains an issue. So in that employee care kit that I mentioned, we also guide the managers to also respect boundaries and manage time. We also give our young employees, especially young parents, guidelines in terms of how do you also keep a balance in terms of small kids and ESCOM and all the work that has to happen. So there is an issue around boundary management. I do agree.
Now, as we're about to conclude, Tumelo, what would you say from the trends, the report, are your recommendations to those who are still trying to figure out how to go about location liberation or adapting their workplaces and getting their employees to adapt to these new arrangements?
I think there are a few things that organizations can look at. And the first one, and I guess ESCOM has done it very well, is looking at your organizational processes that relate to people. Firstly, how we communicate and allocate work such that people are clear around their outcomes, but also the enabling infrastructure and the support in terms of technology that is required. Once you have got and how really the empowerment around the managers and the leaders, because I think that was another biggest challenge for them, especially those who are used to managing you being here. So empowering them and giving them ways to manage people, and then looking at how you performance manage. Once you've looked at such processes, such policies, and how you recalibrate those, other key thing is then how do you really maximize out of this kind of a new workforce strategy? looking just at their workforce strategy, one of the key things that I alluded to earlier was around you now have gotten access to a wider pool, whereas our younger talent did not see really government as an attractive an employer. Here's an opportunity now to use this workforce strategy optimally in a way now whereby we now have got an opportunity for you to work in a hybrid model. Come and consider us. So utilizing the opportunities that are presented by this new normal that we have in terms of a adaptive workplace that employers can also look at. But more importantly, like I said, as we do so, we need to ensure that the infrastructure is in place. People can be able to be supported, not forgetting also the mental well-being. And like I said, the other element is we're seeing now organizations using the days where people are in office more as collaborative, creative, and reigniting our culture, because you don't want to forget that as people are working away from home. So those are the typical recommendations and what we are finding coming out of the survey itself that are helping governments globally.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And Elsie, any particular lessons that you have learned at Eskom that you believe others can benefit from?
I think for us, the biggest lesson we've learned was that this was not happening only because of COVID. As organizations, we were gearing ourselves for the fourth industrial revolution. So I think the new world of work is here to stay. It's not going to go away. So what we need to do as organizations, we need to brace ourselves and make sure that we start reviewing our policies and procedures to be ready for the new normal. And I have seen in our research and in our surveys, there's actually more benefits to the hybrid way of working than the way we used to work prior. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I would like to thank the attendees of this webinar and Masego Rulani for your comments, questions. I appreciate. Tumelo Seaketso, who is Director Human Capital, Deloitte Africa. Thank you very much. Elsie Pule, Group Executive Human Resources at Eskom Holdings. Much appreciated. Thanks again for your time. And Khabat Abani, also from Deloitte, thanks again for your opening remarks at the start of this webinar. We will be bringing you 2 more webinars from the Global Report. We'll be announcing the dates in due time, but I enjoyed and appreciated this morning's engagement. Once again, have a super day. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bratim, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is compiled and produced by the team at biznews.com. A recording of this webinar will be available later today on the biznews.com channel on YouTube. From our team, until the next time, cheerio.